Disrupted everything?
I don't know, but I would love to know. Anyway, thank you for doing me that favor.
Good morning, everyone. Hello, hello. First of all,
Yes, me too.
it's hard to get you guys going. All right. Yeah, I need a bell. Terry has a missions announcement, but I'm going to ask her to. She has another announcement to make. Some of y'all know about too.
You can make it.
No, I want you to say it.
On Friday night, Luke Wingfield proposed to my daughter, Tori.
I'm going to have a wedding.
Don't know.
Church wedding or destination?
Don't know.
Okay.
Don't know anything.
Luke Wingfield, Mark's son, proposed to my daughter.
Yeah? Isn't that great? She said yes. Yeah. All right.
So now that's over with. We're doing a coat drive. And first of all, I want to thank everybody for the food baskets. We had 15 baskets. Our goal was 13. Turned out wonderful. Now we're going to do a coat drive. The Genesis Women's Shelter desperately needs children's coats. And they are so excited that we're doing this. And so they've given me a guideline of sizes. And so I have made all kinds of cards. So if you'd like to draw a card and bring the coat back next week or the next week, that would be great. 1 card, 2 cards. If you want to give cash, I'd be happy to buy items on your behalf, whatever you want to do. But this is a really good project because this lady was so excited when we volunteered to do it. I volunteered you. So I'm going to pass this around and then just take a card or 2, whatever you want to do. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
The cards have the sizes on it?
The cards have the sizes. They're pink and blue. You can pick exactly what you want. I know I'm an anal meeting planner. I do this all the time.
And have them back by?
Next week or the next week. The latest is December 2nd. Because I have to turn them in on December 3rd.
All right. Any questions? Marilyn, we're glad you're back with us. I forgot to mention at prayer time last week that Marilyn had a face plant episode and is really banged up. So she's not being a rock star today with glasses. Yeah, so a lot going on there. We'll talk about that more too. If you had signed up for Thanksgiving lunch, do you have your tickets or do you know where your tickets? No? If you signed up?
Do they collect them? Do they really collect them?
You just need to know what table you're going to. We got everyone's name down.
If you didn't sign up and you want to go, I can't stay and I have to get that Shannon's tickets.
Okay. So see Shannon after class or at the door to the Thanksgiving luncheon. All right? It's sold out. So that's wow. Do you have a hoot?
I have a child's ticket.
Okay, there's one more ticket there. Great. Very good. So if you didn't sign up and you'd like to stay, see Linda or see Pat or Shannon. Okay? All right. Come on in. All right. Oh, I have a question for you. Before we begin, I have a question for you. So we're going to conclude our generosity study this week. Next week we'll do something either preparing for Advent or it's Christ the King Sunday liturgically, and then we get a Sunday between this and Advent this year the way it works. Okay. So what is something that you would like us to talk about during the Advent season? Is there a particular thing about the Christmas story or that season that you've never studied before, that you'd like to study, or that you really enjoyed studying before? Okay? Any feedback on how to craft something for Advent?
What about the Magnificat?
Okay, the Magnificat. Yes, Donna?
how about taking in Matthew some of the people in the genealogy and exploring them? That gets a little bit of the Old Testament in there too,
Yes.
character study.
Old Testament, yes, Caroline?
Or maybe we could study how different it was to be a baby or a child in that time than it
Okay.
is right now.
Or a pregnant woman.
Or to be a pregnant
Yeah,
woman?
for sure. Much
Yeah.
less an unmarried pregnant.
Okay, good. This is all good. All helpful. I'm all ears. I'm going to craft something based on what you suggest.
You're gonna remember all these?
Yes.
All right.
I mean, I'm impressed. I would have to
I
write.
can also.
There's a video.
Oh, okay, that's good.
I can go back and watch the video.
The truth comes out.
If you have any other thoughts this week that pop up, let me know, and we'll figure out what we're going to do with that. But I want to sort of be responsive to that. I think I may have told you this, but my intention after Advent is to begin a series that was a follow-up to the parables on the other red letter words of the Bible. We talked about all the stuff Jesus said in parables. There's a lot of stuff Jesus said that's not in parables. And so I want to go back and fill in the gaps so that when we put those two together, we will have studied everything Jesus said in the Gospels. Okay? I think that will be interesting as well. Great sermon today. We're delighted to have Diana Butler Bass with us, who's an author of her latest book is called Grateful, and we're selling copies of that through Barnes & Noble out in the South Atrium today. She will sign those. A really, really outstanding sermon today, and it's a great service. Hope you'll join us. Okay, today is the last in our 4-week series on generosity. And I have to say a word, say a prayer during this morning. Jacob's the one who wrote these, and today's Jacob's first Sunday.
I've been thinking about
at
them
North
all
Haven.
morning.
And y'all, you see, we're off lectionary right now. Normally we're on lectionary, which the Church Universal is following. The lectionary text for today that he's preaching is on Hannah and infertility.
Yes.
That's just what got dealt him on his first Sunday.
That's amazing.
Right?
Oh, it is so good.
Isn't that really amazing? Indeed.
Is he coming back? We didn't have like the going away thing for him yet, did we?
We
Like
did.
where they present all together? Yeah, we did.
I've been here every Sunday. I don't know.
It was 3 Sundays ago.
And it was between,
Did you guys get it?
Back to the first service.
It was well before George went to Israel. That's why it was a little early. All right. Did everyone get a scripture sheet? Scripture handouts?
No.
All right. Do we have some more scripture handouts? All right. Let's pass them around. So, like these are 5 of the greatest hits here. If you're going to think about generosity. Our focus today, so remember, here's the progression that we've been through. We began by talking about a generous creation, and then we talked about a generous salvation, and last week we talked about generous community, and today we're going to talk about a generous inheritance. And let me ask for a volunteer to read the Joshua passage to us. Who will be our reader today for Joshua? Susan.
When the entire nation had finished crossing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Select 12 men from the people, one from each tribe, and command them. Take 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the first feet stood. Carry them over with you and lay them down in the place where you camped tonight." Then Joshua summoned the 12 men from the Israelites whom he had appointed, one from each tribe. Joshua said to them, "Pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan, and each of you take up a stone on his shoulder, one for each of the tribes of the Israelites, so that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, 'What do those stones mean to you?' then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the Israelites a memorial forever."
Okay, who would read for us the Ephesians passage, the last of these? I need another reader. Carol Ann? All right.
In Christ we have also obtained an inheritance, having been destined according to the purpose of him who accomplishes all things according to his counsel, and will, so that we who were the first to set our hope on Christ might live for the praise of his glory. In him you also, when you had heard the word of truth, the gospel of your salvation, and had believed in him, were marked with the seal of the promised Holy Spirit. This is the pledge of our inheritance toward redemption as God's own people, to the praise of his glory.
Thank you. Well, and you can glance at the other scriptures that are on the sheet as well, if you'd like to. Jacob found a really interesting story that I'd like to tell you about an ad campaign that happened in recent history, but it was for a luxury Swiss watch manufacturer named Patek Philippe, founded in 1851. Anyone know this watch brand?
Oh yes, it's
Really,
expensive.
really high end, right? Did I say it right? Yeah. So they're still family owned, family operated.
So not a swatch.
These watches appreciate, right? So if you bought a watch for $20,000, yes, $20,000 in the 1980s, it would perhaps be worth $400,000 today. So it's probably a good investment, right? They were struggling to come up with an ad campaign. And what the other luxury watchmakers were doing wasn't working for them. So back in this time, Cindy Crawford was advertising for Omega, and Roger Federer was the face of Rolex, and Patek Philippe, they didn't know what to do. They tried a celebrity spokesperson in some test marketing, and their clientele thought it was bad. It didn't work. They said, why do I have to look at other people's stories and borrow the acclaim of other people? So they weren't buying this thing. So they ended up with an ad campaign it's an iconic ad campaign that became known as the Generations campaign. And the first ads, I love this part, they didn't even have watches in them. You never saw a watch in the ad. Instead, they showed simple scenes in black and white of a father putting together a train set with his son, or a mother laughing as she tickled her daughter, and there were these captions. You never really own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
I mean, someone made their money on that ad. Yeah. So this motto, you never really own this watch. You merely look after it for the next generation, is probably a good motto for us as believers, which is the point of today's lesson on inheritance. The New Testament passage we read from Ephesians talks about the inheritance we've obtained in Christ. And I think it's very easy for us to think about the inheritance we have received, right? We are joint heirs with Jesus Christ. And go to Hebrews for that. We could have brought that passage in. What we fail to think about as easily is what kind of legacy we leave for those who come behind us. If we are holders of a faith, will it be shared with a future generation, right? Most of us are very easily focused on what we have inherited more than on what we are leaving as an inheritance for someone else. And just think for a moment how your attitude about so many things would change if your focus were on what you were to leave behind rather than what you were getting, right? Many of you knew my mother, who was here the last 7 years of her life, retired public school teacher. She and my father both had very modest means had come from dirt. I mean, literally, my mother's family were cotton farmers in southern Oklahoma. My dad was the youngest of 9 children. His mother died when he was 4. His father was an itinerant watchmaker. Not of Patek Philippe. And yet, you know, they managed to scrape together and save and pay for a house, and, you know, they came along. And one of my mother's greatest concerns, and John Eric will attest to this, was she didn't want to outlive her money. She wanted to make sure she left something behind financially, right? And I had to assure her I mean, this was like a weekly conversation we had. It's good. It's good. And I think I use that to illustrate, and I think many of you understand that mindset, that you financially want to leave something behind for your children, for your grandchildren. The question we're faced with today is, what are you leaving behind spiritually? What kind of inheritance will you leave for those who follow you today? Many times, we hold on to things so tightly that we fail to plant seeds for the future with that. In our Joshua story today, we get this wonderful account, and I wrote about this in the Prepared for Worship section of the worship folder today as well. We get this wonderful account of something called an Ebenezer. And there's a reason for this, and it goes to another story as well. You've heard the Joshua story. In 1 Samuel 7:12, which we're not going to go read right now, we find a time when the Israelites are miraculously delivered by God's hand yet again. And this happened at a place that was called Ebenezer. E-B-E-N. The transliteration from Hebrew to English is E-B-E-N hyphen E-Z-E-R. Ebenezer. And from that, Samuel instructs the children of Israel to erect another stone monument commemorating their deliverance from the Philistines that day. And that place becomes associated with stone memorials, which today are known as Ebenezer's, right? So think about, we love the hymn, we sing it a lot, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, tune my heart to sing thy praise. In the second verse, there's a line that says, here I raise mine Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Did you know what that meant?
No, I never did.
Here I raise mine Ebenezer. It is a reference to a stone memorial, a monument, right? It is a reference to a marker that's to tell future generations. Our psalm that we didn't read today is one of my favorites, from Psalm 145. One generation shall laud your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. Isn't that a beautiful thought? One generation shall laud your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. That's talking about inheritance, right? The point of all this is, and the point of a beautiful children's moment today with Diana, is often we need visual reminders of what's happened to us. There's a reason that we have historical markers, right? One of the things that I often say to couples during a wedding ceremony is I encourage them to think of today and this place as a place where a historical marker is put down that says today, on this date, in this place, something really important happened that we need to remember for future generations, right? Put down a historical marker right here, a landmark on this spot. And there are times in our lives when we plant those kinds of markers. right? What are some examples that you can think of from your own life or maybe the life of your family or your community that are those kind of benchmarks that get told over and over again because they're so important? What are some of those stories?
I have such a funny story. My father in Texas was the attorney who was on the committee to oversee the historical accuracy of what was on the markers. And we would travel a lot to visit other states near us and everything. And every time we passed one of those markers, we had to stop and read the marker all together. And there were so many of them that finally my dad just said, you know, everywhere we pass a line, everything has something happened there that was important, that was historical, that we need to be aware of that was there. And so, yay for what we're passing. And I think that was a good reminder that, you know, yes, something important especially happened here, but maybe it was a good story, maybe it was just an ordinary story, but no matter what, we're going to have something important that happened that we need to remember.
That's great. That's really great. Someone else? Yeah.
When you said the watch thing, it makes me think of George doing baby dedication.
Yes.
You know, at that point in time, he says, what he says.
This child does not belong to you. This child is a child of God who you take care of for a period of time. Right? Yeah.
I gave my daughter a peony plant to plant in her yard when her first child was born. And now it's in my yard because I live in that house now.
That's lovely. And often people plant trees, right, to mark special occasions, Carol Ann?
My grandfather was well known throughout the state of Texas because he was the editor of the Baptist Standard for a while, and he started churches everywhere.
Who's your grandfather?
B.F. Dearmore.
Okay.
And he passed on his legacy to 3 sons who were all preachers. And then my dad did such a good job. I'm sorry, I'm hopelessly favored. He's obviously my favorite, but I mean, he went on and he did so much in Africa and Brazil, and he came back to the States, and he's going to be a legacy forever.
So I think what Carol Ann's talking about is important because it's a little bit, it's a nuance to this whole idea, and that is that sometimes the inheritance is what we teach and what we model for others to follow as well. It's not a physical marker, right?
Right.
So let's pause for a moment. Think about maybe how you look like a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or uncle. Think about physical features that maybe would have something in common, right? And when you think about that, imagine that you can also inherit the way you look at other ways, the way you act, the way you think, and sometimes for good, sometimes for ill, right? I don't know what is going
right
on.
outside our door. Same mood at the preschool area.
They're very excited.
Something big's happening out there. I don't know if it demands a marker or not. Other examples? Yeah.
Growing up, my dad was a fix-it person. He had put himself through school, partway through school as a mechanic, and became an engineer. He also would fix things for the neighbors. You know, he was the one that when the water heater went out, called my dad instead of a plumber, but he knew what he was doing and fixed it. He and I had the same eye color, whereas my sister got my mom's eye color. Anyway, part of why I think it's still so fun for me to be able to do habitat houses and church builders and that kind of thing is because that's what I thought everybody did, because that's what I saw my dad doing his whole life.
Lovely. Speaking of church builders, though, and habitat, that makes me think, I suspect when you guys are building these churches, do you write anything on the beams?
Yep. Yeah.
Isn't that a kind of marker as well?
Yep. Absolutely.
So what would that be, for example? Is it prayer? Is it
Um,
scripture?
I've done different things. A lot of people have much better Bible knowledge than I do, and so I'm always impressed with the really long Bible verses that people do. But if things are going smoothly, we all try to do something, because we know the only people that will ever see that in the future will be someone doing a repair or a renovation, because those things get closed in
Yeah.
with the insulation and the sheetrock. You don't know what's written.
It's a hidden marker.
Yeah, it's
Right.
very much hidden.
Yeah, I think that's sort of cool. Yes, Ann?
My mother's family, 5 kids, the youngest child, a boy, died in 1944 over Germany. He has 2 physical Ebenezers, one in Hamilton, Texas, one in Belgium. Of course, his remains are in neither place. But his sacrifice, along with millions of others, changed the course of the world, plus his family never forgot.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Oh, yes, Kathy?
My father was school teacher at Adamson High School for 38 years, and he died in 1960 when I was 4 months pregnant, and he was so excited, you know, that I was going to have a baby, but he never got to see it, and I'm so sorry Russell never got to know him, because he was, but anyway, when at his funeral, we went to Cliff Temple, and at the time my dad was teaching at Adamson, and there were only the 2, I think just Sunset and Adamson in Oak Cliff at that time, but anyway, Dr. Wallace Bassett, who was the pastor at Cliff Temple at that time, and he did the service, and I remember one thing he said is, though he is dead, yet he speaks. And that's in the Bible.
It
so
is.
It may not be arranged exactly
Yeah.
like that, but you know, I thought, well, it means someone even does something and it can live on, their influence. And I remember at his funeral, there was just going out to Laurel Land from Oak Cliff, you know, and it was just such a long, long line of people who were following along the highway.
That's a beautiful story, Kathy. It reminds us that our lives can speak beyond our life, but depending on how we choose to live our lives, right? Yes, Susan?
I think our Pathways to Ministry program is wonderful. Just wonderful. It is already an inheritance and will continue to be.
Yeah, beautiful, indeed. Other examples, John Eric?
So, with my firm, our founder's son believed at one time, disagreed with his dad completely. His dad, as many firms at the time, were taking their firm and making it a family partnership. So it was, just the family would own it and kind of it would go along those lines. But Ted Jones believed so adamantly against that that he actually quit the firm for 2 weeks, went back to his family farms, and his dad had to send a representative out. And lo and behold, Ted, famously said to his dad, "Dad, I don't need people to share in the profits," because it was his 2 sisters that were going to be part of the family partnership and had never worked for the firm. And so he said, "Dad, I don't need people to share in the profits, I need people to share in the work." And that today is a legacy to all of us. As I mentioned recently, I was offered partnership.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't have that if it was still a family partnership. And so at every, meeting that we include the families, we always have a toast to Ted.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful story. Yeah, indeed. So, yes. Oh, sure.
We were talking about Wallace Bassett. My mother and father were married by Wallace Bassett at 5716 Gaston Avenue. And that house is still there. Every time I pass by, I think about the wonderful legacy that was left for my brother and I in their lives, which were united formerly 5716 Gaston.
Beautiful. You guys have great stories today. I love this. So one of the things the children of Israel in our Joshua story figured out is that their story didn't belong only to them. It belonged to the community and to future generations as well. So think about that for just a moment. How does it change the way you live your life if you comprehend that your story, your life story, doesn't belong just to you, but it is something that belongs to others around you and yet to come. So an easy example is those of you who are teachers and counselors that deal with children or youth every day. Think about your story intertwined with theirs. There's a meme that's been going around this week on Facebook that speaks to this. I'm going to paraphrase it. It says, who the conductor of a symphony is not nearly as important as who a local music teacher is. Because if it weren't for the local music teacher training students, there would be no one to play the symphony. Right?
You may have known this was going on, but CBS does a feature type Sunday morning show every Sunday morning. One of the features this morning was the band director at Woodrow.
I saw that it was supposed to be. I haven't seen the clip yet.
It was, and this is as a former band nerd, I mean, it was really well done. It wasn't hokey and whatever, but the fact that the band director, it kept saying, came from an affluent suburb and saw when Woodrow only had maybe 15
Yeah, it was down
kiddos,
to almost nothing.
that he quit his affluent suburb and went to Woodrow, and what it's meant to those families and
Yeah,
kids.
Chris Evans is the director. He's a good friend of ours.
Well,
He is the reason my boys are jazz musicians today.
Wow.
Yeah. Get a little teary on this one. It's so funny because yesterday I was cleaning up in the garage and I found a photo of a much younger Chris in 2010. So Garrett was in the top 10 of his graduating class at Lake Highlands High School. And in RSD, they have a breakfast or lunch or something for all the top 10 students in the graduating class. Garrett was number 3. He said if he had known how small the difference was between him and the number 2 kid, he would have tried just a little bit harder. And you get to invite one teacher to that event who's been important to you. And Chris is who Garrett invited to that. He was not at the high school anymore. He was at the junior high at that point. But yeah, that's the kind of influence that I think a teacher can have, and so can all of us in different ways, whether you're, regardless of who you are, right? Do you get that? You get the idea behind this? Thank you. That's a beautiful story. I can't wait to go watch that. Yes.
You may be familiar with Sam Prestridge, who was, okay, his mother and father owned the little corner grocery store where we had our little charge account when I was a kid growing up.
Oh, how funny.
Yeah, and I did not go to church, but his mother, every time I went in the store, would mention, come to Sunday school, come to Sunday school. And she said, you can come and stay in my class, even though I was not of her age group. You know, you can come and stay in my class. This was East Grand Baptist Church when we met in the post office in Dallas, because we didn't have a church. So that was the beginning of my understanding of what church is and what God is, which led me to my salvation, the corner grocer.
That's so
And
cool.
hopefully, all of us have the ability to think of people, those key people in our lives, who've been the turning points, right? We are their inheritance, in a way, right? I can think of my 3rd grade Sunday school teacher, Wanda Hubbard was her name. And it was because of her that I came to faith. I can think of other people along the way who were there at just the right time to influence me in just the right way. I would not be who I am today without their influence. And all of us have those people who put an inheritance in us, right? Other examples? Yeah, Helen.
This is the negative example. The church that my mom goes to is 75 years old or more, and she's constantly trying to shame that church and is saying, as long as we've been in this community, we have left no impact. We should be leaving more of an impact, having been here this long. It's not working.
As is so often the case, right?
That's what keeps running through my mind while you're talking. The stands that this church has made that is contrary to regular theology and Baptist standard belief, but they made it. The church made a choice and decisions that they knew they ought to go, and because of that, generations behind will be following.
Thank you, Jim. That's beautifully said. I'll tell you, for my own part, I'm not lying to you when I say there's not a week that goes by that I'm not in communication with someone in the transgender community who's just finding what I've written and is coming on, asking questions, seeking help. It is an incredible thing to see how long the tails of that are, and I think Jim's point is true. When you look at people who come into the church and who find faith or renew faith, and what is the ripple effects down the way from that? I'm reminded from your story, Helen, of the work that we do together here at Gaston Christian Center. So if you don't know that story, here it is. Gaston Avenue Baptist Church is the second oldest Baptist church in Dallas County. It was formed shortly after First Baptist, and they located down on Gaston Avenue. Were any of y'all members at Gaston at one point? Anyone in this room? We've had a lot of Wilshire folks who have heritage there.
My dad grew up at Gaston.
So Gaston, in the 40s and 50s, was an enormous church. 2,000-3,000 people on a Sunday. They built huge buildings down there by Baylor Hospital. And there came a point about 25, 27 years ago where that neighborhood was changing. Not only was Baylor buying everything up, but the housing was transitional, right? And people weren't coming there anymore. And there's a bunch of other stuff happened as well. And so they sold their property to Criswell College, and they moved out to Royal and Greenville, bought an office building, and decided they would start over. At that point, they were a few hundred people. Not the 3,000 they had been, but they were a few hundred, and they thought they could make a new start of it. And so they planted themselves in a new place. And over the next 20 years, it just didn't work. It didn't take. Thing after thing after thing happened, and so Gary Cook came from here to be their part-time pastor in his early retirement. And Gary's the one who helped them understand that they needed to think about their legacy more than reliving the glory days. Because like most churches that Helen's talking about, there's a desire, if we just try a little harder, we'll get back to those glory days, when of the 40s, 50s, 60s, even though the world has changed all around us, right? And Gary's the one who helped them get to that point. And this is a church that has a deep foreign missions legacy. Bill O'Brien has said that there's no other church in the Southern Baptist Convention that has produced more international missionaries than Gaston Avenue Baptist Church. So it's deeply embedded in them. And so we got together and came up with this plan to create a new entity that would carry on the legacy of the Gaston folks. So at the time we started this 6 or 7 years ago, Gaston Oaks Baptist Church, they renamed after they moved out, had about 75 active members, and the average age was 83.
Wow.
The average age was 83.
I like
Now,
that. It's so fun.
some of those people are still, some of those people, many of those people are still living, but they're down to about 25, 30 people now. Their oldest is 103. Clarence?
Orally.
Oh, and there's Orly, yes. So there's two, there's more than one over 100. Clarence may be 104 now. He still volunteers. He's amazing. Yeah. So what's happened over time is that little group of people, they deeded their property to a new nonprofit we created called Gaston Christian Center, and they're tenants in their own building. And now there are 9 congregations that meet in that building on Sundays.
Wow.
There's a medical and dental clinic. There's Gateway of Grace Refugee Resettlement Ministry. There's a university there, and there are a constellation of other nonprofits in that building. And today, on a Sunday, there will be more than 700 people in that building in worship. From the seeds of a congregation that 7 years ago was only 75 people with an average age of 83. Because they invested themselves in an inheritance more than protecting who they were at the time.
My pastor in Ennis was Paul Stripling, was
Yes.
pastor of Gaston when all of that started changing.
Most of us don't get to see the fruit of our labor.
That's right.
Yeah.
Most of us just have to be in faith, doing the best we can, and leaving the fruition of it to the Lord.
Indeed. Most of us plant trees under which we will never sit.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we build cathedrals we'll never see completed. I've got a whole funeral sermon I do sometimes on cathedral builders. And if you think about a true cathedral, how many generations it takes to build it, that the people who start building it never see it completed. But they build in faith because of the inheritance idea, right? And that's what our story from Joshua helps us think about today, is leaving markers that are positive and enriching along the way. I know that some of our choir people are going to have to leave, and so I'd like to do something before we get to prayer time. As you're leaving, if you would you pass by, and we'll just get everyone to pass by, would you pick up a stone, and let's build a little Ebenezer here in this bowl this morning. As you pick up a stone, I'd like you to think about either someone who has been an influence for you, and you're placing a stone in remembrance of them, or place a stone and think about an inheritance you want to leave for future generations. So just come on by, put a stone, we'll build a little Ebenezer here. Choir folks leave, everyone else be seated, and we'll come to our prayer time. All right? I should like play the harmonica or something.
Maybe we could sing the song. Can I, some people have left their tickets at home, so I was gonna run down all our tables.
Yeah.
Do we do that before prayer time? Or-
Yeah, hang on a minute.
Okay, I just wanna let you know that that's what I was scanning.
All right, let's let everyone come forward from wherever you are. Yeah. And then go back to your seat and we'll have our prayer time. No, we're not for
Paul Stripling.
That was the way it was.
But they never, I mean, you know, my parents didn't know that. No, excuse me. I'm glad these are not watching it up here. I've noticed that.
How are you doing today? Doing good. Thank God.
I know, right? I'm so grateful.
Well, you look like you lost a lot of weight.
Yeah. I really know.
She was.
Maybe a little.
How are you doing? It's good to see you today.
I didn't see where you went. As you're returning to your seat, I want to call your attention to another kind of stone memorial. So if you look at the cover, let me get everyone's attention up here, please. If you look at the cover of the order of service today, this is a piece of art. This is a piece of art by an Israeli artist. And you can read about him on the inside, Yoram Ranan. It's sort of abstract, but this is called Kotel color stones. And the Kotel is the Western Wall in Jerusalem. And this is depicting the stones in that Western Wall. That's the legacy of the Jerusalem temple, right? It's one of the few remaining architectural features of that temple that's still there, right? And think about the legacy of that building and the stones there as well. That's just another visual reminder. I love that piece of art. I love that artist. Donna?
So what are you gonna do with our stones? I hope that, could we keep it in here somewhere? Since this is our class, this is our Ebenezer class.
I actually borrowed these stones.
So it's temporary.
Gotta go back.
So I would encourage taking a photo of it.
We can present it on Facebook.
Yeah, John Eric's gonna. Remember it in your heart.
We got it.
All right, for those who are joining us on live stream, I hope that you've enjoyed this experience today as well, and maybe you'll pick up a stone. I'll tell you this quick story that Diana Butler Bass tells in the children's sermon today, for those who don't hear it on the live stream. Diana has literally written the book on being grateful. That's the title of her book, Grateful. And what she tells the children this morning is she shows them there's a sizable stone that she carries with her everywhere she goes. She puts it in her suitcase, she takes it on trips with her, she sets it by her bedside wherever she is every night. And it's a stone that says, grateful. And it's a stone, she said, I have trouble remembering to be grateful. And I carry this stone with me as a reminder that I need to be grateful for what God has done in my life. So, as we wrap up our thoughts on generosity, I think gratefulness leads to generosity. And that's why we've ended with this lesson on inheritance. Not just about what we've inherited, but what we're leaving as an inheritance to future generations as well. All right. Goodbye to live stream, folks. And now let's turn our attention to our prayer concerns for today.